what happened on IT security. It'll also be informed by the leak inquiry underway and, of course, lessons learned from this budget.
Okay, it's just that it seems to me that that could be quite quick and easy to find out which bit of government could access the forecast early in March, because that's quite a serious issue, isn't it? Because it was within government.
So to the detail, the review to you and the Chancellor suggested there was a single access in March. It suggested that might be benign. Since then, a media organisation has stated that they accessed it. So I think that's the latest of where we are. So I don't know whether that is the same. I don't know whether it's less benign than we think and that was them, or there's more access to it. But we will get to the bottom of that via this review.
Okay, and so we're waiting for the whole review to get the answer to that particular point. Okay, what's the timescale for that review?
I would hope to conclude everything ahead of the spring statement, so early in the new year.
Okay, well, we'll keep in touch with you on that. And, Permanent Secretary or Chancellor, do you yet know what the recruitment timetable is for Richard Hughes' successor as chair of the OBR?
Well, I met with Tom Josephs and David Miles earlier this week, along with the Permanent Secretary, to thank them for their service and for continuing in their roles. It is unlikely that for the spring forecast we have a new chair, because obviously we need to go through a rigorous process, and they are happy and confident that they can lead us through that. But of course we'll go through a rigorous process, and we will advertise the role as soon as is possible.
Okay, so as soon as possible, before Christmas, early New Year?
I think it's most likely to be early in the new year. It's only a week or so until the Christmas recess, and we'll put it out as soon as we can.
That's fine. Thank you very much for that. Chancellor, I mean, you've made a statement about leaks, and we need to put to you the questions you obviously you answered very clearly to the Shadow Chancellor yesterday in the House. But just to be clear, I think we need to just go through a few points. Are you in control of all media briefings that emanate from the Treasury and political operations inside number 11?
Yes, and myself and the team officials are very clear about the Macpherson principles. Of course, as I said yesterday in Parliament, I did not disclose confidential information, but as I've also been clear, there have been leaks, and that's why we've set up a leak inquiry, and that is why we are doing this work. So that investigation is happening at the moment to ensure future budget security, including, as we've already discussed just now, making sure that the OBR as well. And just for your information, we are working with the OBR on IT security, and so in the spring they will publish via gov.uk rather than on their own platforms. So that's the first step.
The independent report by Keir Martin and others indicated. So you're in control of media briefings. Are you therefore responsible for all media briefings that emanate from the Treasury in number 11?
As I've just said, Dame Meg, there were leaks that were clearly not authorised. And that is very serious, which is why there is this review going on. But if you'd like me to address specifically the issues on the 13th of November, I'm very
well,
happy.
Certainly, if I can get to that. I mean, but in the lead up to the budget more generally, there's obviously a very tight circle of people who are aware of information. I mean, the information about potential rate movements for income tax is probably one of the most protected bits of information, I would imagine, in the system. Roughly how many people would be aware of that information?
I don't want to give you a number without being able to check the number of people who...
Secretary?
So the leak inquiry will set that out and set out the recommendations. The answer is that we have all sorts of security things in place for any budget. Those have been repeatedly tightened, but clearly we're going to have to revisit and reset, and it is going to be imperative to increase our security, and that's very much my intention.
Okay, and you, Permanent Secretary, said to this committee in February when we were in Darlington, that was around leaks at that time, and I quote, "You really do not want to give a running commentary on that or publish things as it goes along, because that would be extremely market sensitive and therefore deeply unwelcome." I'm assuming you still agree with that
very much so.
Approach. And Chancellor, you said on the 10th of November to the BBC, it would actually, so let me go into the issues around let's go to the 13th of November. So the Financial Times reported then that the Prime Minister and Chancellor have ripped up earlier proposals to raise the basic and higher income tax rates, according to officials briefed on the move, amid fears it would anger voters and further antagonise mutinous Labour MPs. Well, perhaps some, not all, perhaps we would agree with the characterisation, but that's what was reported. So I just don't understand why you don't know yet who those officials are. Do you know who those officials are, Mr. Bowler?
Should we go through the timeline?
So on the 4th of November, I gave a speech where I set out my priorities for the budget: to cut the cost of living, to cut NHS waiting lists, and to cut the debt and the deficit. I was clear in that speech that I wanted to build more resilient public finances with the headroom to withstand global turbulence. As you saw when I delivered my budget, I was able to increase the fiscal headroom from £9.9 billion that I delivered in the spring to £21.7 billion, so more than doubling the headroom.
Yes, we know those facts.
I was clear that to achieve those objectives, that we will all have to contribute. On Thursday, the 13th of November, there was a leak to the Financial Times about one element of the budget. The leak presented partial and inaccurate information and an inaccurate picture of the budget strategy. The implication that some could take from that story would have been that I had ditched core elements of the budget strategy that I'd set out just a few days before in that speech, and that I wasn't going to build up the headroom that I had previously said was necessary. This wasn't true. And so both the Treasury and Number 10 issued statements on the 14th of November on the record to the press to be clear that the budget priorities stood, including to build more resilience into the public finances with headroom to withstand global turbulence. It was very important because the story in the FT was both partial and inaccurate, and it was important that quickly we ensured that people understood that the strategy that I set out publicly on the 4th of November was still stood.
Can I just say, this is a story by George Parker, a very renowned political journalist at the FT, and he did say, according to officials briefed on the move. That's quite direct for an off-the-record briefing. It is very, and he's not the sort of journalist who...
It was not an off-the-record briefing, it was a leak.
You're really clear it was a leak?
I'm absolutely categorical that was not an authorised briefing. It was incredibly damaging and frustrating. That is why we have a leak inquiry. Okay. It was not briefing that was signed off by me, any of my ministers or officials. It was unacceptable. That is why there is a leak inquiry going on.
Okay. And so, Mr. Bowler, if this is cited according to officials briefed on the move, so is your leak inquiry looking at officials?
Yes.
Is it looking at advisors?
Yes.
Is it looking at ministers?
Yes, and it's being carried out by the Cabinet Office to do the leak inquiry, so it's a look at the Treasury and wider departments that would...
Okay, and you don't...
And of course it is right that it looks at all those people. That is not suggesting that we think any of those people are responsible, but everybody who had access to information should rightly be part of that leak inquiry.
Absolutely, and I think we would not expect anything different from you. Mr. Bowler, where did you get with the leak inquiry about the story to Bloomberg in March?
I wrote to you on that in March, and the conclusion of that was the inquiry was not clear whether it was a leak or speculation.
Okay, so what do you rate chances in 1 to 10 of getting an answer on this leak inquiry?
Well, I'd say a couple of things. I would say that it is not the case that leak inquiries don't get anywhere. It is the case that even in the last year across government, civil servants, I'll just speak to them, have been found to accidentally or deliberately leak information, and that has led to action, including dismissal. And secondly, I would say that we'll see the recommendations of this leak inquiry and we'll take action on them. I'm sure it will give us a recommendation about how many people knew things and the extent to which that's greater than what we intended for how many people knew things. That will be a useful piece of information which will want us to lead to being much more careful still on who knows what when, and I'm pretty determined.
I think everyone
to
will
deliver
want
on
that to work. You've got, on Thursday last week, the Chief Secretary to the Treasury told the House that there would be this inquiry into the leaks, so we welcomed that at the time. Which leaks? Because the Chancellor, you've spoken about the one to the Financial Times in 13th of November. Will the inquiry, Mr. Permanent Secretary, cover all of the other information?
That is the main focus, because that was the clearly very damaging leak, and that's where the focus of things is going. But obviously it's for the inquiry to take it where they will.
Okay. Can we just move on to the OBR's misgivings about the communications, because that's what led the OBR to write a letter. And I just think it would be helpful for the record, Permanent Secretary, if you could be clear that the information that the OBR provided in that letter was not unusual. A lot of it's in the EFO anyway. Yes. It was only the two, round 1 and round 2, that were additional information provided to
yes,
the
that's
committee
right.
in that letter.
And I'd also point out, and I think there's been some confusion about this, that it's worth saying that the Treasury, as in the Chancellor,
agreed that letter.
Took the extraordinary step to agree to release that information to deliver, including to this committee, maximum transparency about all of this. I would also say that it would be our endeavours, I think the OBR and ourselves, to now return those discussions to private, which is the best bet for policy making here, so that in future events we can exchange forecast information in private to take the right policy decisions.
We asked the OBR that question last week about whether they would be willing to make this a regular thing. They had no particular objection. So you're saying that the Treasury would not want to provide the Treasury Select Committee with that information post the budget? Well,
look, there's a debate to be had, and some countries do things differently, and we can look at that, but it would be my prior that you need, that it's for good policy making, you reserve the right for privacy between those things. I'd also point out that the
Chancellor's nodding on that, so Chancellor, you agree with the Permanent Secretary?
Yes, I agree with the Permanent Secretary.
I'd also point out that a feature since I think 2022 is the OBR published the timetable of when they're sending their forecasts to the Treasury. And I think you had evidence, the Lords Economic Affairs Committee had evidence from Andy King and others. I mean, the fact that they published that timetable does lead to quite a lot of speculation about what each forecast says. So, maybe
when did you first know about the letter? When did the OBR start talking to you about writing that letter? When did you agree?
The OBR said they were minded to write a letter. We said we'd agree with that writing of that letter. The original intention was that would be published on budget day, the OBR took the decision to delay that for obvious reasons.
Okay, so they approached you, but you agreed it straight. Yeah. Can you remember what time frame that was in?
In the immediate run up to the budget.
So during November.
Yeah,
during November.
Late November.
Okay. And just finally for me, Chancellor, on the 10th of November, you said to the BBC, and I quote, "It would of course be possible to stick with the manifesto commitments, but that would require things like deep cuts in capital spending." And you clearly set out, as you mentioned earlier, a strategy for your budget, and you set out those two options: breach the manifesto or cut capital spending. So could you just be clear for the record which one you chose?
Well, I said in my speech on the 4th of November everyone would have to contribute. We were able to keep that contribution as low as we did by using a range of more progressive tax, like the high-value council tax, the gambling tax, the tax on dividends and property.
Which we'll get into in the second.
Yes,
but of those two, you set out very clearly on the 10th of November, those were your two options. So what you're saying really is you didn't seem to go for either of them. Is that fair characterisation?
Well, of course, there are always other options available, and there's a number of policies that leading up to the budget that we cost, as the Prime Minister has been clear.
Very starkly on the 10th.
Well, those are two options. Those are two options that were available, as the Prime Minister has subsequently said. We did look at whether we needed to increase the rates of income tax, given our concerns around the forecast and particularly the productivity downgrade, which took £16 billion off in terms of revenues in the final year of the forecast. In the end, that wasn't necessary, but we did, as I set out in my speech of the 4th of November, ask everyone to contribute by freezing the thresholds that the previous government had frozen for 7 years by an additional 3 years from 2028.
We can get into figures, but the 16 billion obviously was offset by other measures, so it was about a 6 billion gap, wasn't it?
Well, that's not entirely correct. The £16 billion is the result of the productivity downgrade because of higher wage inflation and price inflation. There were also higher tax revenues. But higher inflation is not a good thing because, of course, that erodes the spending power of government. So I wouldn't characterise it as we had good news on inflation. Far from it. In fact, I was very clear in my speech on the 4th of November that one of the objectives of the budget was to reduce that inflation, which was, of course, resulting in higher tax revenues, but not for a good reason. And so the revenue that was available was, you could say it's welcome from fiscal terms, but of course it's not really welcome because we wanted lower inflation. I think it's just really important, Chair and Committee, that we don't see the revenues from higher inflation as somehow being good news during the forecast process.
No one was suggesting it was good news, but it offset the 16 billion to a degree.
But of course we wanted to reduce that inflation, which is exactly what we did, as the Deputy Governor of the Bank said to you yesterday.
Well, indeed, I was going to refer to
0.5% off of inflation next year.
The bank was clear to us yesterday they're still on their trajectory towards 2%, which steady.
I think the Deputy Governor was a bit clearer than that. I think she gave evidence to this committee yesterday saying that next year 0.4 to 0.5 percentage points off inflation because of the measures in the budget.
Yeah, she was very clear about that, as on the record. Mr. Bowler, final question from me about the leak inquiry. Will you be publishing it?
Yes.
To the world or to this committee?
I'll be publishing my review, which will include the actions we're taking from the recommendations of the leak inquiry, yes.
Would it be possible for this committee to see the full inquiry in a confidential?
I'd have to engage with the people doing the inquiry about their views on that, but I wouldn't like to keep
I have to say, I think I can say with confidence, as chair of this committee doesn't leak. So we would obviously be very careful about any sensitive information, but we have done that in previous, as you know, in my previous role.
Yes, I do.
So a lot of sensitive information. So if we could take that offline. John Glenn MP.
Thank you. Can I turn to the sequence of events? The last piece of meaningful data from the OBR was the 4.2 billion figure on the 31st of October. On the scene setter number 11 press conference on Tuesday the 4th, the impression was left by everything that was covered that income tax was going up. And in your interview, Chancellor, with Pippa Crerar of The Guardian, you said that you didn't know the size of the downgrade, the productivity, and that after that press conference, raising of income tax remained on the table. What I don't understand is what further data points came from the OBR after the 31st of October, because as far as I can see, there wasn't any meaningful data.
Chancellor.
Thank you very much. As you'll know from your time at the Treasury, pre-measures is not the final word from the Office of Budget Responsibility, because then you have post-measures forecasts as well. And in the post-measures forecast, they take into account the policy decisions that we take as a government on tax and spend. And the OBR rightly do their own analysis of the revenue that different measures raise. And so there was plenty of additional information being shared between the OBR and the Treasury between the 30th of October and Major Measures 1 and indeed Major Measures 2. So I think it is not right to say, and I think you'll know this from your time at the Treasury, that the 4...
I was never Chancellor.
Longest serving economic secretary since the Second World War.
The point I'm making is, I want to just try and clarify that there were more meaningful data points between the 4th and the 13th, 14th of November.
Yes, and
what led to those being meaningfully different?
Yeah, yes, there was, and the reason for that is that the OBR do costings of all of the changes that we're making, as well as there being interactions between the tax measures and other economic variables, whether that be GDP, consumption, inflation. And so all of this is changing. It was a big budget. I think we can all agree that. And every measure both has its own impact, but also a cumulative impact. So there was a lot more information between those. The other thing I would just add is that the 4.2 billion was not the number that we were using at the Treasury, because there was also the policy decisions between spring statement and autumn budget that meant that the 4.2 billion pound headroom was actually, from our reckonings, around a 3 billion pound deficit against our fiscal rules. So not only was 4.2 billion not the last word from the OBR, but it's not the number we were using internally at the Treasury.
The clear impression left from the scene setter press conference on the 4th was that income tax was going up. I mean, that was what every newspaper was saying. Well, income tax was going up. And then 10 days later, it wasn't. So what could you tell us about what happened about your decision-making process during those 10 days?
Yeah. So a couple of things. First of all, in the speech in the 4th of November, I was very clear that everyone would have to make a contribution. And you saw that in the budget on the 26th of November. We froze for an additional 3 years the tax thresholds, national insurance and income tax, that the previous government had frozen for 7 years. We extended that for a further 3 years. That's not a breach of the manifesto, but it is asking everybody to contribute more. I was very upfront about that.
Raise taxes for working people.
And I was very upfront in my speech in Parliament when I delivered the budget that would mean that everyone was having to contribute in exactly the way that I set out in my speech on the 4th of November. So I stand by very much the speech I made. I said in that speech that we were going to cut the cost of living. We did 0.4, 0.5 off of inflation next year, as Claire Lombardelli said to you yesterday. Cutting NHS waiting lists, we've already reduced them by 250,000. We protected NHS spending in the budget, and also cutting the debt and the deficit, which you can see in the OBR and Treasury documents. But I was also very clear in that speech, both that we would need to build more fiscal resilience given global turbulence, which we did, taking the headroom to £21.7 billion, but also that we would have to ask everyone to contribute.
Did you decide to change the decision not in terms of raising the rate of income tax in those 10 days?
The Prime Minister has been clear that that was one of the things that we looked at, but we were also looking at the tax thresholds. In the end, because of the decisions we made on higher value council tax, on property and dividends, and a number of other measures, we were able to keep the contribution from working people as low as we possibly could.
Did you make that decision, or did the Prime Minister?
Well, the Prime Minister and I met 2-3 times a week during the budget process. That is not always the case between Chancellors and Prime Ministers, I recognise that, but there is a very close partnership between myself and the Prime Minister, and so we took him through all of these all of the numbers and all of the options, and we decided it together as a team, because that is what the Prime Minister and I am.
Thank you very much,
Chancellor.
Dame Harriet Baldwin.
Thank you, Chair. Now, Chancellor, in the run-up to the general election, you said that you had no plans for tax rises beyond what was in your manifesto, and that you would focus on growth, and that growth was really the way in which you were going to get more tax revenues coming in. You've now put together two of the biggest tax-raising budgets in UK history. And the Office for Budget Responsibility has told us that there's not a single measure overall that has a positive growth impact. They think, in fact, that tax hikes are harming growth. So can you tell us what your growth plan is? It's not one of the priorities of this budget. Are you still chairing the Growth Mission Board?
Yeah. Thank you very much for that question. First of all, and you know we've been through this a number of times. There was new information after the general election. First of all, the £22 billion black hole in the public finances left by the previous government,
which has been discredited by the Office for Budget Responsibility.
Not at all. The £22 billion black hole left by the previous government, which was set out to me by Treasury officials the weekend that I became Chancellor of the Exchequer, which we had to fill, and then the £16 billion downgrade to productivity, the impact that had on fiscal revenues. And as the Office of Budget Responsibility were very clear, that reflects the weak productivity in the previous Parliament. The OBR made the decision to do that revision this summer, but they were very clear it doesn't reflect any policies of this government. So those are the two key things that have changed since the general election. And of course I did go into the general election with the targeted tax increases on non-DOMs, on private equity, on private schools, on the energy profits levy that we were elected to deliver. We have delivered those. We have had to do additional tax raising because of the mess left by the previous government. But you've also asked about growth. Well, shall I finish answering your question, Dame Harriott?
Yeah.
You've asked about economic growth. You will know that in the spring, the OBR upgraded their growth forecasts. It was the biggest upgrade to growth from a non-fiscal measure that the OBR in their 15-year history now has ever made, and that reflected the changes that we made to planning. And they also upgraded the growth forecast because of the capital investment that this government is prioritising. Of course, under the previous government's plans, capital investment was due to fall in this Parliament. I protected capital investment and have continued to do so, even in this challenging budget with the productivity downgrade. So the OBR have been very clear that both the planning reforms, voted against, I believe, by the Conservative Party, and also the capital expenditure, which the Conservatives were going to cut, has resulted in an upgrade of productivity. And indeed, if you look at, during budget week, made further progress on a third runway at Heathrow. We signed off the film studio in Marlow that had been opposed by Buckinghamshire Council and that we called in. And since the budget, JP Morgan have announced a huge investment in Canary Wharf. Goldman Sachs have announced that they're doubling their headcount of jobs in Birmingham, and in addition, the Co-op have announced that they are freezing or cutting 2,700 prices in store. These are all pro-growth measures, but probably the most pro-growth of all is the 5 interest rate cuts that we've had from the Bank of England since the general election. That's only possible because of the stability that we've provided after the chaos we had in previous years.
So you chose not to put any new growth measures in this budget.
Well, that's exactly. No, that's not what I said. Dame Harriott. Sorry, Dame Harriott.
Perhaps, Ms. Dame Harriott, if you ask a question, then the Chancellor can.
Yes, but don't contradict what I've just said. Yes, we have regular meetings of the Growth Mission Board, but I did not say, in the answer to my question, as you suggested, that there were no growth measures in this budget. Far from it. In the week of the budget, we made further progress on the runway at Heathrow. We signed off the film studio in Marlow. Jamie Dimon, the chief executive of JP Morgan, who could invest in any country in the world, chose the day after the budget, referencing the actions that I had taken in the budget, that as a result of that, he would be making the investment in Canary Wharf. Similarly, Goldman Sachs, a company that could invest in any country in the world, announced the following day, because of the measures in my budget, that he was investing in Britain.
Okay, thank you. Dame Harriott, questions.
Do you accept, Chancellor, your revealed preference now in terms of the 2 budgets you've brought in is that you hike taxes a lot, and that the speculation and the impact of the speculation in the run-up to this budget had a real-world impact in terms of people's decisions, in terms of mortgages, in terms of people making decisions on their pensions, in terms of a range of different things that changed behaviour within businesses. A lot of businesses said they put decisions on hold, and that this impression that you're ready to go for tax rises is going to hang over this country's economy for the rest of this Parliament?
Of course, the previous government took taxes to a record high and saw interest rates go through the roof. And since the general government, no, I'm not surprised you don't want to hear about the previous government, nor do voters.
Can I just have
there we are. There's a rare
moment
moment of agreement. No one wants to hear about the previous government.
Questions and answers would be good, please.
Yes, which is what I'm trying to do, Dame Meg. We have returned stability to the economy, which has enabled the Bank of England to cut interest rates 5 times. And as you would have seen, since the budget, a number of mortgage lenders have cut interest rates on mortgages. I think interest rates now on mortgages are lower than they were since the Prime Minister, maybe one who you might not want to remember as well, Liz Truss, took interest rates through the roof. I very much welcome that. Again, those reductions in interest rates would not have been possible without the stability that I've returned to the economy.
We're going to get into measures in a moment, Dame Meg, but last year I asked you, Chancellor, about the way in which you're implementing all the Article 4 recommendations from the IMF in terms of, you're basically going through the whole list of recommendations and ticking them off one by one. Last year I asked you if you were planning any overhaul of council tax. You said, no, we're not looking at that. I asked you if you were looking at road pricing. You said, no, we're not looking at road pricing. I would argue that you've started the process on both of those in this budget. There are a couple more measures that I think the public out there would be very interested in hearing if you can rule those out. Capital gains on primary residences, are you planning to do that in this Parliament? And are you planning to change the state pension to a single lock in this Parliament? Can you rule those out, please?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much, Chancellor. Luke Murphy, MP.
Thank you, Chair. Chancellor, just very briefly, you've pointed to the productivity downgrade as a result of the record of the previous government. Would you have made different choices in this budget if it were not for that downgrade, and if so, which ones?
Chancellor.
Well, thank you very much for your question. The productivity downgrade by 0.3 percentage points took £16 billion off of headroom in the final year. Obviously has bigger impacts than that, because the impacts is not just on fiscal revenues. The impacts are also felt in people's wage packets, or certainly the forecast for those future wage packages, because productivity is obviously the biggest driver of growth, and therefore the biggest driver of the money available in the economy, including for wages. So it is very disappointing that the conclusion is, after the last 14 years, including the botched Brexit deal, the impact of the pandemic and the impact of the policy decisions of previous governments, has resulted in our productivity being so much lower than the Office of Budget Responsibility previously forecast. Well, I guess I'm Chancellor in the world as it is, and rather than the world as I might want it to be. But of course, if the circumstances are different, I would have made different decisions. It goes back from the point from Dame Harriet, the reasons why we have had to raise taxes in the last 2 budgets were last year because of the £22 billion black hole in the public finances, and this year because of the £16 billion downgrade to productivity forecasts. I'm determined to beat those forecasts. We beat them this year. The OBR forecast in the spring that our economy would grow by just 1% this year. They have now upgraded that forecast to 1.5%, and I'm determined to beat them in future years, because the Conservative legacy does not have to be our destiny, which is why we're pursuing a whole range of growth policies.
Thank you very much. That's very clear. Thank you. Chris Coughlin, MP.
Thank you, Dame Meg. Chancellor, you know that I'm a fan of the government's language on public R&D, and the OBR has published that a 10% increase in UK R&D capital would equate to a 1.9% long-term increase in productivity, which are stunning numbers given the 0.3% productivity downgrade created a 16 billion fiscal black hole. So what I'm struggling to understand is why you're only increasing public R&D by 0.7% a year, 13% in total to 2030. As a result of which the OBR has concluded that will have no impact on growth, because in fact it's a lower rate than in the decade after the financial crisis.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Coughlin. If there's one thing we know about you is that you care very much about R&D, and rightly so. And I was very pleased in the spending review to be able to increase R&D spending in real terms during the course of this Parliament. And I said earlier, the OBR did take into account our CDEL spending, which includes R&D, in their forecasts. And CDEL, the higher CDEL budgets is one of the things that contributes to their higher growth forecasts. So R&D is one of the things that is contributing to that. But you're right to mention it, and right to mention the importance of it. Obviously, public R&D is really important, and that is what we can influence, but so is private R&D. And I am pleased that one of the reasons why growth for this year has been revised up is because investment has been higher, and that's very important.
Of course, but given your belief in public R&D, I mean, do you think it's okay that we are only in the middle of the G7 in terms of our rate of public R&D, and that the UK has had the worst productivity crisis, as you said, since the financial crisis?
Yes, look, and the OBR are clear about some of those reasons for the productivity downgrade. As I said to Mr. Murphy, the Brexit deal, the pandemic, and the decisions of the previous government. The plans that I inherited from the previous government would have seen capital spending as a share of GDP fall from, I think, 2.5% to 1.9%. We've managed to protect that, to grow it in real terms during the course of this Parliament, and that's one of the reasons why I believe that we can beat the productivity forecasts that the OBR have set out in their most recent documents.
Thank you, Mr. Coughlin. John Grady MP.
Thank you very much, Dame Meg. Last week, Dr. Beck Fries from PIMCO told us that UK fiscal finances are in a fairly fragile state. Bond investors are focused on actual deficit reduction over the next 2 years, as opposed to what is forecast or promised for 2029-30. Is that, Chancellor, where you think the bond markets are too?
So I think it's best if chancellors don't get into comment on bond markets. But what I would say is this: we were very focused on these issues when we put together the budget package, both increasing the fiscal headroom, which goes from 9.9 to 21.7 billion pounds, but also on fiscal consolidation. And I recognise that fiscal consolidation needs to be consistent through the Parliament. So for the last few years, public sector net borrowing as a share of GDP has hovered around 5%. This year, 25-26, it is due to fall to 4.5%. That is the first time, I think, in almost 5 years the PSMB has been less than 5%. It's then forecast to fall to 3.5%, 3%, 2.6%, and then 1.9% in the final 2 years of the forecast. And the IMF has said that this is the fastest rate of fiscal consolidation of any country in the G7. And that is the right approach, because it is still the case that we have elevated borrowing costs. The borrowing costs that the UK government faces went up substantially in September, October 2022, for reasons that we all know and understand. But I want to bring those borrowing costs down, and fiscal consolidation is an important part of that.
On the tightening, Chancellor, what a lot of commentators point out is that the savings, much of the savings are back-ended to 29-30. Much of the tax rises are also back-ended, but we have real pressures at the back end of these forecasts. 6 billion of SEND provision moved across, defence spending going up, but there's a real risk it has to increase further, and a general election in August 2029. So last week, our expert economists, I would say, appeared less than confident that this tightening was politically achievable. Do you believe those economists to be wrong?
I believe in the numbers that I set out in my budget, and a lot of people have got views of what I was going to do in my budget and whether I'll be able to live within the means set in my budgets, but we have consistently done that, and we've increased the headroom. We've also set out just before the summer recess our spending review, and I was very clear that public services now need to live within that envelope, and we are legislating for the tax increases that were in the budget That is also very important to give confidence that these tax increases will indeed happen and that public services will live within the budgets that I've set.
And would it have created more confidence if we brought some of this tightening forward, given that lenders take the view that the UK has for many, many years lacked fiscal credibility?
Chancellor.
Well, we want to make sure that we get things right. And so for the high value council tax, for example, we are revaluing properties in G and H. That cannot be done for next spring or the spring after. Similarly, on things like electric vehicle EVED, those changes can't come in overnight. I think that everybody recognises that and that we need to take the legislation through to achieve
we'll be coming to the measures
those things. But
in
we
detail.
will legislate so that markets and everyone else can have confidence that these plans will go ahead.
Thank you very much. John Gunn MP.
Yeah, if we look at the defence spending, government's stated goal to get 3.5% of GDP, we look at health spending maintaining its long-run average growth rate and education spending being held flat in per pupil terms. And the announcements of the budget, according to the Resolution Foundation, said that there will be 6.4 billion of real term increase between 28 and 29, and that means 88% of what is commonly known by the Labour Party as austerity 2010 to 15 measures. So isn't there a real risk that even your manifesto said 7 billion in tax increases, your first budget was 40 billion, now 26 billion, you're still going to have very, very tough settlements outside those three departments?
We have now made those settlements, and when I became Chancellor there hadn't been a spending review for a number of years.
Yeah.
We had negotiations, we came to the settlement in the spending review, and departments are now living within those settlements. That should be the confidence that is needed to show that we will be able to do that through this period. And even in the last years of the forecast, real term spending on public services continues to increase by nearly 1%. That is very different from the 2% cuts to public spending in the first years of the 5 years of the coalition government.
So you don't recognise the pressure on other departments at the end of the period 28-29 to 29-30?
Well, departments are always under pressure. There's always more things to spend on than you can afford to, and that's why prioritisation is so important. Those settlements are not imposed. They are negotiated and agreed with departments.
Chancellor, I totally recognise the integrity of the spending review process, but I'm just saying that if you align the reasonable expectations of health spending, education spending, and your aspirations on defence, all the other departments have a pressure which is pretty much resonates with what happened between 2010 and 2015. That's the fact.
Oh, but one of the differences is that in the early years we had an immediate uplift in spending to end the fiscal fiction, frankly, that previously existed in the forecasts. And similarly, we've protected the CDEL budget. So if you look at TDEL, it is a slightly different picture. And the reason that we've done that is because
just to be clear for people watching, the capital budget.
We protected the capital budget, which is really important for improving the productivity of public services. We've also agreed with departments £14 billion worth of efficiency savings. We are tracking those closely, and we are delivering against those targets. We set out further efficiency targets in the budget this year, again, which all departments have signed up to.
Final question, but what you're saying is there will be no more money for those other departments beyond what you've set out already in 28, 29, 29, 30?
Well, I've always been really clear that in the end we have to grow our economy to deliver the money that we need to keep increasing living standards and have the money to deliver our public services, which is why growth is the number one priority of this government. And as we saw, if you just had 0.3% higher productivity growth, which would translate to 0.3% higher GDP growth, you'd have £16 billion more a year.
Beyond this year, which I recognise the change that you've quoted, in all future years, the OBR say that growth is downgraded consequential of this budget
They're
decision?
not consequential of this budget, Mr. Glenn, and I want to be really clear about that. The reason for the productivity downgrade, the OBR say explicitly, that is not because of the decisions, any of the decisions that this government has made. In fact, they've scored positively both the CDEL, the capital spending, and also the planning reforms.
It's lower in every subsequent year.
But not because of government policy, because of the productivity downgrade based on the previous 14 years before we took office.
Thank you, Chancellor. Yuan Yang MP.
Thank you, Chair. So at Budget Day, the OBR announced that it was going to use a new higher threshold for scoring the impacts of policy on economic capacity. This higher threshold would have ruled out the majority of policy changes scored under your Conservative predecessor. Did you have a discussion, did the Treasury have a discussion about this change of policy with the OBR, and were there policies that you wish would have been scored that may have been close to that threshold that were not scored as a result of this change in criteria?
In the end, what really matters is not whether something is scored or not, but whether you actually get the growth or not. And so when we are, deciding on policies as the Treasury, we don't sort of say what will the OBR score. We say what will actually deliver the growth. And I've been really clear from opposition and into government that our growth mission is built on the pillars of stability, investment and reform. Stability that comes from strong fiscal rules that are stuck to and not just changed on a whim because the numbers don't turn out the way you want to. And we've stuck to those fiscal rules in 2 budgets, a spending review and a spring forecast. We are delivering with greater headroom, the highest headroom now for a number of years. Investment by protecting the capital investment and crowding in private investment, including through the National Wealth Fund and British Business Bank, and reform, particularly to planning, but also regulatory reforms, cutting the administrative burden of regulation, pensions reform to unlock private capital. And one of the biggest reforms is the trade reforms we're making, whether that's the reset of our relation with the EU, the trade deal that we've signed with India, or indeed the trade deal that we've signed with the United States, and the planning and infrastructure bill that should have royal assent before Christmas. All of those things are pro-growth, and whether the OBR score them or not, I am confident, we are confident as a team, that they will build a stronger, more resilient economy with higher growth. And the good thing about the growth that we are generating, it is growth that will be felt in all parts of the country.
Thank you, Chancellor.
And does the Treasury, I presume you collect your own scorings of those measures that don't meet the OBR's new thresholds?
Well, of course, we look at what we think the growth impacts of different policies will be. But as I say, we don't prioritise things based on whether we think the OBR will take them into account. We prioritise them based on the impact we think that they will have on growth. And certainly the trade deals, those 3 trade deals, and hopefully more to come, I think will have a significant impact.
Thank you for now, Ms Young. Bobby Dean MP.
Thank you, Chair. Chancellor, you spoke about your decision this budget to increase your headroom to around about 22 billion. We had a discussion about headroom in the spring statement where you said to me that everyone would like more headroom, but no one wants more taxes, no one wants lower spending. I think we have the balance about right. And you gave me variations to that answer 3 times. Do you accept now that actually you got that balance wrong in the spring?
Well, I increased taxes by £40 billion in the budget last year, and I don't remember any party clamouring for more tax increases. And in fact, I think the Liberal Democrats oppose most of the ones that we are trying to take forward. So I did think we got the balance about right last year, but I was really clear that one of the objectives of this budget was to build further resilience and we were able to do that with £21.7 billion of headroom.
I know it seems esoteric, but I mean we've had reports coming out that saying that the inflated debt costs to the UK are worth about £7 billion a year. And we've all reflected on the speculation that's gone around this budget in terms of tax measures for the last 6 months, the policy uncertainty perhaps putting off investment as well. And so you obviously felt the need to correct the level of headroom this time. So why was it not a mistake previously to maintain a low amount of headroom in the spring?
Well, headroom went as low as £6.5 billion in the last Parliament. I built it up to £9.9 billion in my budget last year and in the spring statement. I felt that was the right approach. But obviously, since then, we have had a number of global shocks, whether those are shocks to trade, whether those are ongoing conflicts, whether those are disruptions to supply chains. And as a result, I believed it was the right thing to increase that headroom further to £21.7 billion, given the world in which we live
I think
today.
that was clear in last spring. But to move on to the second decision
wait,
taken,
that's not
you
the
can
case.
can I ask my next question?
Well, just because when people come back and say, well, that was the case in the spring.
I asked these exact questions in the spring because you had to do a fiscal repair job in the spring,
yes.
obviously. We did have Trump's election already take place at that time. You had already lost the headroom between the autumn and the spring. So I think it's fair to say that many people thought that that headroom was already low in the spring. You've decided to correct it this time, but you're telling me it wasn't a mistake not to correct it in the spring.
Well, in the spring, the headroom would have been eroded without the actions that I took. I took the actions to keep the headroom at around £10 billion. But since then, you'll remember, the tariffs were introduced by Donald Trump that had not happened, and the OBR had not factored those into their forecasts in the spring. So I think things have changed since then, with respect, Mr. Dean.
I'd like to move on also to the decision to move towards one formal assessment by the OBR as well. Again, back in the spring, you said some people were saying don't worry about the headroom, you can address it in the autumn. I felt that would be the wrong decision because we've been very clear in our manifesto and our election campaign, and since we came to office, that fiscal stability is so important. So it's my understanding now that you're not going to make any adaptations based on what happened to headroom in the spring. So does that mean that fiscal stability is no longer important, or was that an incorrect statement to make in the spring?
Well, it does link to your previous question, Mr. Dean, because in the previous question you asked about the level of the headroom. We've now taken that to £21.7 billion, which, as you know, is more than the average movement in headroom between forecasts. So I now believe that we have the buffer in place.
The buffer enables you to make that decision.
So
can I just push you on the next question, which is, what circumstances would you feel like you would need to make adjustments in a spring statement? So 22 billion definitely gives you more buffer room, but is an erosion of 5 billion, 10 billion, 15 billion too much? At what point would you act in the spring instead of the autumn to address the headroom, which everybody will still be able to see whether or not a formal assessment is taking place?
So very few countries have two fiscal events a year, and we want to move towards, as the IMF have recommended, to have one major fiscal event a year. And we've worked with the OBR.
In answer to Mr. Dean's question, if you may, just on where you would make judgment.
At what point would you give yourself more headroom? Understand that.
Yeah, we've
and
got the question.
You're not going to take any action.
The Chancellor's had the question, so
yeah,
if you could just answer the question, Chancellor.
Yes, if you give me that opportunity, I'd be delighted to. I reserve the right to be able to take action at any point, but I believe the headroom that we have and the changes that we've made means that I won't need to do that in the spring. But of course, I reserve the right at any time to take action.
Thank you for now, Mr. Dean. Are you and Young MP?
Thank you. I wanted to move on to special educational needs and disabilities funding. At the budget, you announced that this would no longer be borne by local authorities, but would be borne from central departmental spending. Will this be put, well, firstly, the OBR says that this will cost around 5.6 billion. Do you and the Treasury accept that number? And will this be put on one particular department, or will it be spread among a number of departments? And if so, how will it be spread among departments?
Chancellor.
Thank you very much for that question. What we have done, what we did in the spending review, was continue the statutory override for an additional 2 years, so during which time local governments, if they overspend compared with their forecasts on this, they can put the costs on central government. We've extended that for a further couple of years, but then, as we were really clear in the spending review, we will then send through the overall government DEL override envelope, and that statutory override ends in 2027-28. Where I would sort of disagree with the OBR, and well, not necessarily disagree, but the OBR looked at absorbing that send pressure from just one budget line. That is not what we said in the spending review. They just gave that as an illustrative example. So I don't recognise those impacts on school spending. As you know, the Education Secretary at the moment, with the relevant minister, is doing a review of SEND. That focus of that review is getting the system right, because no parent, no constituency MP believes the system works well today.
Thank you. Ms. Yang.
You're saying that the 5.6 billion number from the OBR is based on the current policy, and that policy is going to change, so therefore the number itself may not be that number. Is that what you're saying, Chancellor?
No, what I was saying is that the OBR's illustrative example is that SEND pressure is absorbed on one budget line. That is not what we set out. But the purpose of the SEND review is about delivering a system that works for families, for children and for schools. And it's right that the Education Secretary, not the Chancellor, leads on that.
Yeah. Ms. Coughlin, MP.
Thank you. Chancellor, in October 2021, my 17-year-old constituent, Jennifer Chalkley, who was autistic, died of avoidable suicide. I fully acknowledge the role that perhaps the Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives had in terms of scrapping Sure Start, in terms of contributing to this crisis. Can I have your assurance, please, that you will properly fund both the Department for Education and Children's Mental Health Services to end the SEND crisis in this country? Because if you do, not only would that be a fantastic legacy for a Labour government, but also would enable me to go back to Jen's mum and tell her that her daughter's death had not been in vain.
Okay.
Thank you very much, and for bringing up that example, and please give best wishes of me and I think all of the committee to Jen's family for what they went through. Too many parents and children are let down by the SEND system. Anyone that's a parent knows that, and any constituency MP, and you've only been a constituency MP for a year and a half, but you will know through your post-bag and through your surgeries and your visits to your schools and talking to families in your constituency that the system just doesn't work. And we have to reform it. My mum was a special needs teacher when I was little, and she then became a classroom teacher because there were cuts then to special needs teaching, and it meant that kids weren't getting the support they needed. So this is something that matters to me, including as a parent. But it should not be me leading the work on SEND. I'm the Chancellor. It is right that Bridget Phillipson and the Department for Education lead on this, but to say to Jen's parents and family directly, we want this system to work for them. We want it to work for families. We want it to work for young people. We know it's let them down. This is about devising a system that is inclusive and that enables all children, whatever their abilities, whatever challenges that they face, to fulfil their potential and to live fulfilling lives. And that is the commitment I will give to Jen's parents and to
We obviously all look forward to the SEND review coming out, we think, in the new year. Thank you very much, Mr Coughlin. Yuan Yang, MP.
Thank you, Chair. Yesterday we spoke to the Monetary Policy Committee of the Bank of England, and as you may have seen, there was disagreement on the committee, and there has been since their last meeting, on the impact of quantitative tightening of the active sales of gilts on the interest rates that the government faces for borrowing. The bank staff's estimate of this cost to the taxpayer has gone up over the last year. Does the Treasury have its own estimates of the cost of quantitative tightening to the taxpayer?
If it's okay, I'm going to pass this question. We've discussed this at length, but I'll pass it to the Permanent Secretary.
It falls to the lot of being Treasury Permanent Secretary to have to answer questions about quantitative tightening. So it's a monetary policy matter, as you know, and as such for the Bank of England. But in terms of understanding what is happening, because it's a deeply complex thing, it's worth saying that there are three areas where you extend out. So the OBR, in their recent forecast, set out detailed projections, including of the losses they expect and the impact on all their fiscal metrics. The Treasury's annual report and accounts sets out the impact on departmental spending budgets, and the bank provides quarterly reports with its projections of cash transfers. Yeah. To the nub of your question, each September, the Monetary Policy Committee decide on what they want to do in terms of sales for the coming year, and they announce that. That's not something that we is our decision. They did that last September. They actually reduced some of the active sales they were doing and did some things on skew. So
they're increasing their active sales.
No, they've reduced.
They're reducing the overall pace of
I think more things are maturing, so there's less need for active sales. So it is all set out there, and it is all in our accounts and all the rest of it. And of course, as everyone knows, there were cash transfers to the Treasury up until the end of 2022, and now each quarter there's transfers back to the APM.
Yeah. Chancellor, I know that from the MPC's perspective, as they've stated very clearly, value for money for the taxpayer is not in their remit in monetary policy. But of course, as the Chancellor and as the Treasury, value for money is certainly something that concerns the Treasury and also all of us constituency MPs. Do you have conversations with the Governor about the value for money impact on the taxpayer from their pace of QT?
I don't think it's accurate to say that value for money doesn't need to be taken into account. Value for money does.
Yeah, the MPC states that they do not take that into account in their principles because that is not one of theirs.
Yeah, but the Bank of England do, and the MPC and the Bank of England are a little bit different. I don't know, James.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, it's their decision and it's not ours. But I think I think it is unfair to say that they don't take value for money into account. Yeah. They take that into account as well as the impact on their monetary policy. And they've written to the committee a whole set of times, including on that. And I think you did a report on it last year, which explored those very issues.
Thank you, Rachel. The predecessor committee did good work on that. Luke Murphy MP.
Thank you, Chair. Chancellor, my constituents, or a vast majority of them, the top priority is cost of living. Both yourself and the Prime Minister have made clear that that is a top priority for the government as well. Evidence to the committee from both the OBR and the Resolution Foundation show that there's been relatively strong growth in real household disposable income in this Parliament thus far, but the outcome for the remainder of the Parliament is quite bleak. Do you recognise those forecasts? Do you expect to beat them? And if so, how?
Thank you very much for that question. I think the growth rate of RHDI per capita is expected to be positive in every year of the forecast. But you're right to say, and this reflects the answer I gave, I think, to John Grady earlier about the impacts of the productivity downgrade isn't just a fiscal impact. That's the one that all the concentration has been on, but of course the most immediate impact is on the size of the economy and therefore the money available for wages and everything else, which is why, as I said, I'm determined to beat that forecast. But living standards, I guess, are sort of determined by the income you've got coming in and how much you're paying out. And as I said in my speech on the 4th of November, I was determined that one of the things that we achieved in this budget was cutting the cost of living. And as the Deputy Governor said yesterday, next year that will be 0.5% off of CPI. There are sort of three primary things we're doing to achieve that. The £150 off of energy bills by scrapping eco entirely and taking other levies off bills, freezing prescription charges for the second year in a row, and also freezing rail fares, which I know will be a big issue for constituents of yours in Basingstoke, the first time that's happened in 30 years.
Do you anticipate having to come back in future budgets to take similar measures on the cost of living? Is that something you would expect given the outlook for living standards that the OBR and you have just recognised?
Chancellor.
Well, I think the OBR and the bank expect inflation to peak this year, to fall, I think, on average of 2.5% next year before reaching target at 2% the following year. And for the remainder of the forecast period, the reductions in energy bills and the freezing in other prices, and indeed the freeze in fuel duty until September next year, all contribute to inflation coming down quicker than would have than we previously thought. We then need to continue trying to boost productivity and growth to put more money in people's pockets, but the focus in this budget was specifically on costs, which is why we introduced that package of measures.
Thank you very much. Jim Dixon MP.
Yeah, I think many people will welcome the redistribution within the budget, where you can see each decile as you go lower down the income scale doing better. Do you, however, believe that might be a problem, the squeezed middle problem that we've seen in this country for many years, in which people in the middle of the income distribution are finding it very difficult to maintain their living standards, particularly as they get further towards the tax thresholds in which their income is then taxed at a higher rate?
First of all, Mr. Dixon, I'm very disappointed you haven't mentioned the Lower Thames crossing. I think it's the first time I've had a conversation with you and you haven't. But I will address your actual question. The distribution analysis that we published alongside the budget shows that every income decile, except for the top, is better off through the measures that we have taken in the last two budgets, but the biggest beneficiaries are in the bottom couple of income deciles, particularly as we lift children out of poverty, which we're very, very pleased to be able to do at this budget. I do recognise that we've asked everyone to contribute by freezing the thresholds for an additional 3 years on top of the 7 years for which they've already been frozen, but we were able to keep those contributions to a minimum by asking those with the broader shoulders to pay more, and some of those specific taxes, whether it's on landlords, to rebalance the tax system, but so that whatever form of income you have, we're narrowing the gap between the tax rates that you pay on it and things like the high value council tax, which obviously paid by some of the more wealthy people in the country.
Thank you, Mr. Dixon. Okay, thank you very much. Bobby Dean.
Thank you. I'm just following on from that question about the squeeze middle. There's been some analysis done since the budget about the impact on the 1% or even the 0.1%, and people claim that if you look at those categories, it's not as distributive as the Treasury's graphs present. Mr. Bowler, do you do any analysis, distributional analysis, in regards to the 1% or 0.1% internally?
Well, we do. Our focus is on the distribution analysis we do, which is really, really rather good, I have to say. I'm very proud of it, and it's deeply thorough. It's been complimented for how we do it and the level we get into. All the rest of it, we've done it for some time in that way. So that's the focus we do, and it focuses on deciles. I don't know whether Darmish has any more to say on that.
So we focus on deciles, as the PEMSEC says. We don't have the data on a consistent basis to be able to do things like the top 0.1%. Obviously, that doesn't stop in individual policies from being able to look at focuses of distribution.
Chancellor, I just wanted to ask you if you recognise this analysis that's out there. There's obviously increasing scrutiny about the top 1% and the top 0.1%, particularly as those on middle to higher incomes are starting to really feel the pinch. Do you think that it would be a good idea for the Treasury to start modelling this as well, so you can get a true distributive effect?
I think it is quite hard because of the numbers, but let me just sort of give you one example. Higher value council tax on properties more than £2 million affects less than 1%. Is it 0.6?
Just under 1%.
Yeah, okay. Just under 1% of properties. The non-dom changes obviously affects a very small number of people, as does the change around treating carried interests as income rather than capital gains in private equity. So all of those are taxes paid by the